Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting, fun-filled episode of the Michael and Patty Show. I'm Michael.
And I'm Patty.
And it's summertime in PEI, and the yachts are in the water at the Charlottetown Yacht Club. Nice to see. All we need is some sun here now.
Yeah, you sound very calm today, Michael.
I'm very calm. I think I only had 3 coffees rather than my usual 9.
You sound very zen today.
Let's get right into it, Patty.
Sounds good.
Okay, so some things to look for in an unfinished basement. An unfinished basement is a great way to see what the construction of the house is like, and I think it's really an overlooked aspect of a house when it comes to heating and cooling, primarily heating. I was through a house recently where it seemed the owner of the house was addicted to doing things upstairs to conserve heat, like putting little pads behind electrical outlet covers, and she had foam around all the doors, and the list went on and on. But she neglected to look at the main source of all the cold air, which is actually where the furnace, because this was forced air, which is fairly rare on the island, was sucking most of its air from, which was the basement, which was ice cold. In fact, it wasn't even heated, with the exception of maybe one vent from the furnace. So the point to this topic is going into an unfinished basement will give you a great idea as to the quality of the home, and it's probably one of the most important parts because it's the foundation. What I've always said is if I get a home inspection done, I'm usually interested in major components: foundation, plumbing, and electrical. Not so much all the other little piddly stuff like is there a railing leading to the basement, or maybe there's not a GFI in the kitchen. Patty?
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as, so from the ground up, typically what people look for is, does the space, is it conducive to how my family lives or how we live or I live? And that's typically what you look for. However, you should be spending probably equal amount of time down in the basement because that is, no pun intended, the foundation of the entire home. And it's going to be indicative and let you know, tell a story of what you can expect living in that home.
And this wasn't on our agenda sheet, but I always run right to the electrical panel because it tells a huge story. You can do some research on that. We've covered it in past episodes. But let's look at the basement of an older home. Keeping in mind, this particular home we were looking at was about 60 years old. Back then, they didn't really concern themselves a lot with insulation and basements and everything else. So what I was looking at is I was looking at the basement to see if it was wet, if there was any mold. I didn't put this on the list, but the calcium penetration through the walls, which indicates there's water traveling through the walls. What's that called?
Efflorescence.
Efflorescence. It almost looks like snow. Insulation. Back then, they were probably using pink insulation, which is fiberglass. There are better materials these days. Fiberglass, air can pass through it. If you've got fiberglass in front of a bunch of holes that lead outside, air can travel through it. Mice love pink fiberglass. And if you research insulation, there's actually insulations, is it wool board or something like that, which mice do not take to as much as the pink insulation.
Yeah, and that was something new I didn't realize because pink insulation just feels it's got little particles of glass and it's very painful to handle, but it doesn't bother, for whatever reason, rodents. They actually like it and they create little channels and canals and trails.
Some people can't touch it. I wear gloves when I'm handling it. I know you do. I itch from it. But I've watched videos on YouTube where they're handling with no gloves, no mask, no nothing.
Interesting.
So I think it's more almost like an allergy. Pink insulation should be what color?
Pink.
It should not be black. If it's black, I would think air's traveling through it. And the other thing you can usually do is if you pull the insulation down a bit, I'm not suggesting you do this in someone else's house, but if you ever get into the process of renovating the basement, you'll probably find mouse droppings, usually on the top or on the sill, and you may find some holes in the walls, which is producing that black insulation. The other thing I look for is if I can see 2x4 walls. In this case, some of the walls had 2x4 walls, but they did something, in my opinion, they never should have done. The 2x4s were touching the raw concrete, which is untreated, unsealed, and not protected by a plastic barrier or these days they have those blue 2x4s, which are pretty well water resistant, which you can use as a base, but they didn't have that, and all the 2x4s were rotting that were touching the floor. One of the major sources of heat loss, which you should probably have spray foamed. There's other methods to do this. You can put foam and then put little spray foam yourself in. I would just suggest you get it spray foamed. Is the rim joist cavity or the bay. That's the spot that's at the end of the 2x6s or the 2x8s where they meet the outside wall. That is a major contributor of cold air. So that would be the first thing I would look at. And then if you are insulating the basement, what a lot of people are doing is they're putting between an inch and a half to 2-inch pink foam. They're gluing it to the wall with pads. Like they're not doing lines. You see a lot of amateurs use lines. They use like 6 or 8 pads of glue because it gives it a thermal break. And then you put your insulation and 2x4s on top of that. Didn't want to get that much into insulating basements, but it is something to look at that will give you a good indication of, is this going to be an expensive house to heat? What's the infrastructure, the foundation like? Do I have any leaks? And what can I anticipate fixing or improving down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives you an idea, again, not to rule out the house because everything else may have checked all the boxes, but if anything, where do I start? What should I be looking for? And if you are a homeowner and you're thinking all these little fixes are going to help reduce some of your costs, it might by pennies, but you really should be just putting your time and effort into fixing some of the issues that might be there in your basement if you have a basement and it's not on a slab.
And one of the things that you may want to do is in your province or state, usually there's government agencies or private entities that will do an energy inspection. And in some cases, there may be grants for improving your insulation and so forth. I know here on the island, we still have the energy audit program, which I think is, well, don't quote me on this. I think it was a couple $100, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a couple $100 for them to come in and do the audit. And then you would be submitting that to the insulation company or province and seeing what you would qualify for based on your application.
And how can we tell, just on one last subject here, if there's vapor barrier underneath the cement floor and behind the walls? Is there an easy way to figure that out?
This was something new for me to have learned that I know you during your journey in looking at basements and that you were able to also learn. So I'm not going to end up explaining it the way that I know you'd be able to, Michael.
Well, it's very simple. Behind a wall and underneath the cement floor, there should be a vapor barrier, because if there isn't, water is going to get into your house or it's going to cause condensation, which is going to get wet. It's going to create mold. How you tell is a couple different ways, one of which I discovered in my research, the other one of which I discovered just by renovating a house. Number one was tape a plastic bag, like a garbage bag, on the floor and the wall. Leave it there for a week, come back in a week. If there's all kinds of condensation behind it, you know you probably don't have a vapor barrier. I haven't used that methodology, but that seems to be very popular and that seems to be highly solicited on YouTube. The other thing I find is if you just have a couple commercial fans and they're blowing at the wall level, you will find condensation coming up through the floor if there's no vapor barrier below that. So that was my recent findings. And of course, the other thing they recommended, but I probably wouldn't because it does get expensive, even though I do know Patty carries one of these with her everywhere, is a thermal imaging camera gun. And that will show you the discrepancies in the temperatures, and it usually will give you a pretty good idea as to what's happening with the foundation. On the topic of thermal guns, where I really find it handy is when you're upstairs and you can see if the walls are insulated, which walls aren't. And if you have in-floor heating, which one house I checked out did, we actually discovered the in-floor heating ceased to exist in certain parts of the house, as did the in-wall insulation.
Yeah, and that was unbeknownst to even the listing agent because it's kind of hard. People will lose the story when a property exchanges hands, especially if they were just using it as a secondary home. And yes, that came in very handy to be able to use thermal camera to be able to identify that.
That was a great example. We should have done a video on that. Moving along here, I'm using AI for shopping and negotiating and absolutely everything. And the one thing I did recently is Patty and I required a bin, a construction bin, to remove debris from a house being renovated. You usually know certain neighborhoods in Prince Edward Island, and I'm sure there's some in your town, are always those ones that as soon as they get purchased, a construction bin shows up that week.
Yes.
And we have those here too. Patty originally told me a construction bin was about $1,000. I had my assistant, Claude, my AI assistant, do some research, give me a list of people I need to call, and I actually got that cost down under $500. I think it was $5 and change with tax.
Absolutely. And it also depends on the bin size as well. It's not one
This
size
was
fits all.
18 yards, I think.
Was it? Okay.
And it was a pretty orange color, and I got it from Bin Depot. And my research from Claude even mentioned talk to Bobby, and Bobby was awesome. Highly recommend Bin Depot and Bobby. I just found that using a private supplier opposed to one of these giant mega corporations, and you know the ones I'm speaking about that pretty well have their feet into every market in North America, did save a lot of money, and probably 50%. And the service was excellent. He got a 5-star rating too, which is rare.
Good.
Even though I think it was just Bobby.
Okay. Well, that's good. And it also helps out local businesses in that as well, who are trying to have a bit of a footprint of the market in that. So if you can, try to buy local or use local services, because that's another thing that, I have tried to go through sometimes the bigger, like right now, I'm in the midst of hiring a company to do some cleaning. And so far, everything seems to be good. I found a couple that has started up a business about a year ago here. They seem to have good testimonials. They are hardworking, and depending on how the job is on the other side, I'll end up giving them a shout out, but I think it's a little premature right now. But their pricing seems very competitive, and yeah, it's always nice again to support local no matter where you are.
The other day, Patty, I was talking to a lawyer. We were doing a smaller deal. It was just a building lot or something like that, but small deals are just as important as the big ones. And he asked what lawyer was representing the vendors or the lot sellers, and I told him who it was, and he said to me quite nonchalantly, "Oh, well, maybe the purchasers can use the same lawyer." And I said to Patty, "It's interesting that the agent was so casual about that. I know this is done all the time, but I don't know if the purchasers would understand the ramifications of having the same lawyer represent both the purchasers and the sellers. And there will be a reason why the lawyer will read them the riot act, get them to sign a pile of disclaimers, and also indicate if there's any issues with the transaction down the road that he or she will not represent either one of them." Patty?
Yeah, I'm an advocate to have your own representation. So why would clients, whether you're a buyer or a seller, want to use the same lawyer? And my answer, based on all my years of experience in transaction, is it comes down to saving money. However, you may not actually end up saving money if there is an issue that results from title or the final walkthrough didn't go well. There are always that possibility that something may go sideways. And when you use, and again, in the lawyer's defense, if you're in the same firm and you work across the hall from another fellow lawyer, and now the two of you've got to do this dispute and battle, it's not something that can be done effective. And I speak from experience because I have had clients in the past who have opted to use the same law firm, which they thought was completely fine. There was even different lawyers within the law firm. But when push came to shove and there was a situation that had arose as a result of some conditions and disputing, and now the seller didn't want the buyer out of the contract, and The deposit was, up for grabs, and it went on for a year or two. And what happened was, like you said, Michael, there was just no representation, and they were waiting for one of the parties to just buckle. And that's basically what happened. About 2 years later, the deposit was released to the seller, whereas really the buyer had all grounds to get that deposit back. So I am an advocate. Have your own legal representation. What you think you're saving on the onset may actually cost you in the end.
Which would be the same when you're hiring a real estate agent. All the time I get people contacting me saying, can you show this property to me? Me as the listing agent, them completely unrepresented in most cases, if not all. I suggest that they use another agent to do that, specifically for purposes of writing an offer, because I work for the seller. My job is to get the best contract with the least amount of conditions at the highest price, whereas the purchaser may not agree with that, rightfully so. They need someone working for them. So find your own representation, preferably a lot of times not even with that same brokerage, because there could be like a buddy-buddy relationship there too, right?
Yeah, it's just best to have, and it runs parallel to, I'm just going to go through the listing agent. They'll get me the best deal. Again, that's probably not a good idea. Can you imagine, Michael, this is where my head just went. So you're in court and the judge is sitting there listening to both stories, and the same lawyer is representing, the plaintiff and the defendant, and they just have to get up and go to the other side, to the other table, talk to their client. Then they have to get up and go to the other side and talk to their client. They're going back and forth in the courtroom. It just doesn't work. You should have your own representation. Do not sit there and assume that you're saving money, because I have seen this go. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it does. And, that's great. But the one time where you really need someone to go to bat for you might be that one time that you went, nothing's going to happen, and it does.
I've had situations personally where you're selling a bunch of properties and the lawyer will represent you but not charge you anything and basically say, I'm not representing anybody, I'm just watching you sign off on the deed. Moving along here, the real estate business everywhere in North America, at the very least, is very entertaining on a daily basis. And when you think you've seen it all, as far as silliness and idiotic ideas, they think of something new. So in this case, Patty's going to discuss what's happening probably within the last few years.
Yeah.
Where what agents will do if the listing expires. These are listing agents. Once the property sells or it's canceled or
Correct.
withdrawn,
Yep.
They will delete the description and or delete the photos as well. Patty?
Yeah, so we did a deep dive into this. And so just to explain, when a listing expires or is sold, what's happening is, and I don't know if it's happening all across North America, but it is happening on Prince Edward Island here, where the listing brokerage will only leave one photo, and they will even go as far as to remove the description, saying some of the features of this particular home. Why that is a bad idea is because an agent comes in, they need to do a comparative market analysis for another seller. And what is part of the value of a realtor is our database. So when we have agents going in there and they are removing the data, it is going to impact the ability for future agents to do comparative market analysis on properties, because especially if it's an agent that works a particular area, well, all the data now there is not available in that area or that community or that neighborhood. So it is not a good idea. The deep dive that we did was we analyzed one of the clauses within our vendor brokerage listing agreement to determine who actually owns this information and the data that is collected. And it is part of my listing presentation when I do go over my contracts with my clients. But I always said, so if you're a past seller of mine, you're going to know this is something that I've probably said to you, and I'm going to have to change my little spiel going forward. It doesn't matter. It's still owned. It's just the body in which who owns the data is different. So I always assumed it was CREA, the Canadian Real Estate Association, that owned the data that was inputted. But in fact, it is actually our local association, the Prince Edward Island Real Estate Association. Once that data gets inputted, as listing agents, we can do things like, or a listing brokerage, I should say, we're allowed to go in, and if we need to update photos or update maybe a data entry error or the wrong detail was put in or the overview, the story of the property needs to be updated, we're allowed to go in and do that. But we should not be in there removing all the photos, removing the overview, because we don't actually own that data. We're just allowed to go in and do a little bit of housekeeping. The Prince Edward Island Real Estate Association owns that data. So if we're going to be removing it, there should be some sort of document request as per the seller's request to remove all of that. And I'm just not sure if that's being done.
The bottom line is that database is used by appraisers, real estate agents, it's used by tax assessors, and if the information isn't there, it makes it difficult for everybody to do their job, including the people that are deleting photos in the descriptions.
And like you're saying, Michael, the province, the appraisers, the insurance companies, whomever feels and sees the value in the data that we have and pays to have access, why are they going to pay to have access if our data isn't there anymore?
Let's talk about adding a garage to a house. Under many circumstances, homeowners feel that a garage is going to add a lot of value to the sale of their house. And of course, this is completely dependent on the location or the market that you're in. But I can tell you that if you are in a house that's, say, an entry-level house, say $400,000, $500,000, $300,000, adding a $200,000 or $100,000 garage, I've seen garages cost as much as $300,000 or more with in-law suites, is not going to add that amount of money to the house proportionate to the amount of money you're spending. In other words, if you add a $200,000 garage to a $400,000 house, it doesn't make it worth $600,000. I've gone down this road myself where I've owned homes and thought, geez, it'd be nice to have a detached double-car garage with an office above it and all this sort of stuff. Only to think when engineer Mike kicks in, says, you're never going to see this money again. You're only going to see this money sometimes if it was some grand home or estate that you had enough value in that property that adding another $200,000 to $300,000, $400,000 may add a little bit of value. You're probably not going to recoup 100%. But the bottom line is, if you live in a house that is an average price range and you're thinking about adding an expensive garage, you may think about just selling that house and moving into something that already has that garage.
I absolutely agree. And the one example of this was a property was purchased prior to COVID or just at the onset of COVID. And they ended up putting on a garage onto the property. So when we were doing their comparative market analysis and we were looking at, based on their price, what did the market go up? And then at the end, they wanted to add the garage cost on top of it, which was the strategy that they took. Well, today that property is worth the amount that the market had gone up, but that garage added no additional value to this home. Those are where the numbers lie. And again, a garage, if it's important to you as a property owner, that's great, but it may not be the deciding factor for somebody else looking at your property. They would have just assumed, oh, well, at the cost that you spent, that garage was always there. And the buyers today are very smart, and they're not going to give you 100%, like you're even saying, Michael, 100% return just because you spent X amount of dollars on some sort of garage or improvement.
And of course, they're always going to say as a homeowner that this is our forever home, right?
Yes.
And we know how many times we list forever homes because there's changes of lifestyle or plans or divorces or they get homesick or whatever the case may be. Grandchildren. So your forever home may not always be your forever home. Next topic is something that was done a lot during COVID, and there seems to be a continuance of it today, particularly in some of the hotter markets when people are buying properties completely sight unseen or with virtual tours, which would be defined as someone looking at a house through FaceTime or Zoom or no longer Skype, I guess it's Teams, and they're just seeing it virtually on a computer screen. Well, there's some information that was sent to us by the local association that comes from the Real Estate Insurance Alliance of Canada, Inc. Avoiding the pitfalls of virtual home visits and inspections. What can you tell us about this? And make it exciting, Patty.
Okay. Well, one of the things, like you had said, during COVID, this became common practice. One, because it wasn't so easy to go on a house hunting trip, which is really where this all was stemmed from, without having to quarantine for 14 days. No one had the time to do that, then do their house hunting trip, then return back home. Then they'd have to quarantine there for 14 days before they're allowed to go to work. So what happened? The trend moved towards blind buying. So you would buy blind, you would just trust the agent to go in and do a virtual showing and tour around the property, maybe even the neighborhood. Hopefully you used Google Street View in that for most of the properties. There's some, if it's a rule, you may not have the Google Street camera go down. However, this became the trend at that time. So the realtors, what we're supposed to be mindful of is, how do you virtually show a property? Conducting an in-person showing is far easier because the buyer gets to experience the room completely with all their senses. Their sights, their smells, the sounds. People can be sensitive to noise outside. Is there windmills? Is the road traffic? So they get to experience a home with all their senses versus looking only at a little screen, watching what the agent brings to their attention while they're trying to pan a room. And the agent, just so you know, is trying to look at the camera to see what they're showing, plus also trying to look over and around the camera or their camera phone to see what is in the room and what else should I include. Plus, at the same time, you're answering questions that the buyer that is watching your virtual showing is asking you. So you got to remember, there's a lot going on from a realtor's point of view when they're conducting these virtual viewings and that. So you can't smell mold. And what if your realtor isn't sensitive to that stuff, whereas you really are? Maybe they're not as sensitive to noise. Maybe they're a little noise blind and they don't hear the traffic because they also live on a louder, street or neighborhood. It's really hard, which is why some of the recommendations and suggestions that came out as a result of this post. Some of the things that you should recommend if you're a realtor and you are having to do this and you've told the buyer, so there's no way you're going to be able to come here and do this in person. I'm going to have to get this in writing. If the buyer ends up submitting an offer, is the best time to do this and include it in the contract. Have it in writing that to protect you as a real estate professional, that you made the recommendation and the buyer chose not to listen and view the property in person. So, but again, always recommend if you can. And as a buyer, you should always do the best that you can to try to accommodate and see the property in person. So as a realtor, what you should do is recommend the buyer hire a home inspector at the very least. Now you have a third party involved in this and it's just not you and what you delivered or brought to them. Recommend if they have a family, a friend that's here on the island or whatever area that they're in, some acquaintance, to look at the property. So another person's set of eyes, again, just a third party, that person then could possibly, bring to their attention if there is any odors, not just only inside. What about outside? What if there's a farm next door and it can get kind of smelly? So you want to make sure you're giving the full experience. Again, noises, humidity, condensation. We talked about the basement in that, Michael, already. Also, if you are saying that, it's a really large room, just give the dimensions. Don't put in your own opinion on large rooms or high ceilings. Best to just say the ceiling measures X, the room measures, X times X. So give dimensions. Don't just use adjectives to describe these features or what you deem as features, especially if you're a 5-foot person. high ceiling could be at that point 7 feet. So if the buyer is 6 foot something, their high ceiling to them is going to be like a 10-foot high ceiling. So just, again, it's all perspective. And the conclusion in all of this is a realtor will always have an obligation to disclose known issues with the property, whether the visit is virtual or not. The key is to be very clear with the purchaser that no additional obligations are being assumed on their behalf by the realtor during the visit. So again, book your trip, come to the island, see the property in person. Even if it is a piece of land, I would highly recommend you experience it for yourself.
Well done, Patty. And those opinions were from the Real Estate Insurance Alliance of Canada, not necessarily our opinions, particularly when it's referencing having friends and family look at a house, because they typically go into that situation. In my experience, like they're saving you from the absolute worst decision you're ever going to make in your entire life. Haven't you found that?
Well, it's not just that now that you've gone down that little rabbit trail. Is they may have another agent that they would prefer you work with too. So they just end up saying, this wasn't good, this home sucks. They're not showing you what you should be looking at maybe.
So just keep in mind that you may not be bringing in the best people for this situation. And the other thing I would also suggest, if you are going to do a virtual thingy, I have, and I know Patty's done this in the past as well, what we refer to as a candid video. So basically this would be us or a videographer going through the house for 20 minutes to an hour, showing you each and every square inch of that house from top to bottom, right down to the sump pump, the breaker panel in the attic. And then you've got something you can review systematically over time and pause and stop and rewind. I find that's a lot more helpful than the quick run through on a Zoom call.
Only if it's the property that, say, out of whether it's 5 or 10 properties, it's the one that they're most interested in. I don't mind doing that, but I don't really feel like I have the time to sit there and do that for a list of properties so that they can continue. I've got a pretty sensitive nose. I'm usually not too bad in presenting defects or little quirks that a home may have to a client, but I do highly recommend, again, this is something that I would completely support, is if it is a property that you're interested in, have that third party, which is a home inspector. You're also getting insurance inspection. There's a lot more. Plus, I also educate my clients on all the tools available to them to continue to view that property.
You're a regular Patty the Tool Man.
Okay.
There's differences in cultures, as we know, from one city to the next, or one community to the next, or even one size of community to the next. Well, there's also different cultures when you're dealing with real estate agents in different areas, and it doesn't change here on the island, nor would it in areas of Toronto or elsewhere. So I recently had an offer come across my desk on a property, and I did the unthinkable, Patty.
What was the unthinkable?
We read it word for word, and we addressed each and every condition and the timeline contained in every condition.
That's what we're supposed to do.
Well, that's what I thought, and that's what we've always been doing, but apparently I was in an area of the province that they don't do this. You just sign it all willy-nilly and say, well, it's in black and white. They're using New Times Roman font. Looks good to me.
Well, yeah, and if that's what the contracts say, why do I have to read it all? It's been the same contract. But to that client, that's a new contract.
So we read this whole contract and nitpicked absolutely every single paragraph in it because the contract wasn't a contract we were interested in dealing with. So rather than just reject it and move on with the day, we felt it might be of an advantage to go through that contract and explain, it doesn't take a month and a half to do a free insurance inspection. It's a phone call. It doesn't take a month to do a home inspection. You've got your house for sale. What is it? What are they going to list it for? How come it's not on MLS now? Knowing full well that 99 out of 100 times they're going to put it on for more than market, which in this case they actually did a week later. It's important that you go through all these clauses. We've covered this numerous times because each clause tells you a story. And if you've got a contract that comes in, the subject to them selling their house, yet the home inspection isn't for 2 months, they're kind of telling you that we don't expect the house to probably sell, or we don't want to spend any money because we're not super serious. But if it happens and all the planets align and there's a rainbow across my backyard that day and it happens, then fine. But there's nothing wrong with breaking down that contract paragraph by paragraph and addressing what your vendors or homeowners would like to see, because it also allows you to collaborate. Because now what this has turned into, now they're trying to sell their house, and they'll actually probably write a meaningful offer once they're in a position to do that monetarily.
Yeah, and you should, if you're a listing agent listening to this, you should be explaining the contract, again, clause by clause, to educate your seller what your interpretation is of the story that the buyer is telling you when they put in a month and a half. So is this just a buyer who's not confident and they want an out, and this seems to be the easiest out? That would be one of my interpretations. Is this a new agent that just doesn't understand and is allowing the buyer, put it until this date to that date? As a buyer's agent, you're to set your buyer up for success, to try your best to get their offer accepted. What seller is going to accept a month out insurance clause? Because there's no reason. You can just say, I'm sorry, I'm not able to get insurance on this property. Or I don't like the premium that this property is, and they don't even have to disclose this, but that could be a reason. Premiums are too high. I've got an insurance clause.
But you're never going to get that. Basically, what they did is they got lazy and they just made all the clauses expire on the same day.
No, and I understand that. But the other thing is, another reason, based on my experience, why I would see a very long, drawn-out condition period is because the buyers are planning a trip here and they want to tie the property up until they're physically here on the island. Or they're not confident with their financing, so they want an opportunity to, see what they can do. They need an extended period of time because they're not sure. They're not going to remove their home inspection prior to getting their financing because they don't want to be out of pocket if they can't even financially be able to purchase this property. There's a whole bunch of interpretations as to why clauses would be written the way they are. You should be dissecting it. You should be explaining to your seller client what it means, or what, again, based on your experience, and hopefully you're an agent that has some seasoned experience and are able to give your client a really good snapshot story of what this offer is telling. And if you're a buyer listening to this with your buyer's agent, or if you're a buyer's agent listening, just know your offer tells a story, and you should be telling a good one and advising your buyer client as to, this is probably not going to get accepted.
Well, one story this contract told me is they had subject to buyer's property, SOBP, the acronym that we use, and the property they were selling, I actually went as far as calculating the absorption rate after I saw it on the market, and the absorption rate told me that it was going to take it over a year and a half to sell this property at this price range in this location. So I was asking myself, why would you write a contract on a house, giving yourself 30 or 60 days to sell your house? They put it on the market for over market value. That wasn't my opinion. That was opinions that were calculated in different ways in software based on sales. To think you're going to sell that house that quick, it wasn't going to happen. It was one of these, if all the stars align, we'll buy the house. Plus, we did other due diligence, which I won't get into here. And I'm sure you've done the same. You should, if you're a smart agent, which you are, is to find out who the buyers are. What's their financial capability? Is their house they're living in? Is there a mortgage on it right now? There's a lot of different things you can do to build a picture of the buyer as well, to understand who you're dealing with, to project or predict how they're going to act as well.
Yeah, and if you're the buyer's agent and you're trusting what the buyer is saying to you, and they're coming from a different area, you should be having a conversation with their listing agent in their city, their town, community, To find out all this information, I think, Michael, probably the example you're giving is a property that's on PEI, so you'd have the means and the opportunity to calculate out based on, again, data that exists and hasn't been removed from the MLS, but you'd be able to calculate out a rough comparative market analysis and absorption rates. If not, you need to speak to their agent based on where they're moving from to get that information from them. And if you're a buyer's agent, you need to relay that on to the listing agent of the property that the buyer is looking to purchase going forward. Tell the story. Don't just email an offer and hope it all flies and someone just lets it slide. You got to present your offers, tell the story, explain your conditions, have a conversation. It may have gone a little bit further with you, Michael, not that you would have accepted or had your clients advise them to accept a contract that had a month or month plus for conditions, but it may have helped.
We actually hired a couple private investigators to follow the wife and husband and kids around for at least a month to see what they're up to.
No, you did not.
No, we did not.
Okay.
Let's get back to AI and how this is such an amazing tool despite certain agents being very reluctant in taking advantage of it. One of the things I really don't enjoy doing is looking at a deed of a property and trying to draw it out to see what that property looks like according to the deed, because that's what the surveyor is going to base a survey and potentially build a plot plan, which includes all the structures and stuff on the property, on is that deed. And if anyone's ever looked at a deed, they're quite boring. They'll tell you, well, we're going to start here, we're going to go so many feet, or they'll use chains, which is an old methodology, a chain 66 feet. And you basically have to draw it out. And there's also things that may be included in that deed that are kind of hidden or cryptic. They're there, but if you're skipping through it because you fell asleep, you miss them. AI, particularly, again, Claude, I've used recently to do a couple different things, which I thought was just mind-blowing. What I did is I took the deed in PDF format, I uploaded it to Claude. We're talking the commercial version here, the desktop version, not the web version.
And just the Schedule A portion of the deed.
Correct.
Not the person's name and stuff. Just for those who might say, I don't agree with you submitting an entire deed into Claude or any AI software.
So we're submitting the Schedule A, which is a description of the property in feet or chains or whatever, hectares, acres, and it will disseminate that information and it will actually draw you a diagram of that piece of property. Have you done that?
No, I haven't done it, but I was very impressed with the results from the outline that it had given and provided to you, which I think it's a great tool if there's a property that there may be a discrepancy, you're unsure of the boundaries, and you're able to input, again, just the Schedule A or the land description part of the deed in so that it can give you an approximate drawing or outline of it. I think, again, not to abuse AI, because I understand there's still mixed feelings that many have about using it. I am still an advocate of using it responsibly, protecting identity of people, making sure that everything is, again, I'm just using it responsibly and being mindful of people.
Nice disclaimer, Patty.
Yes.
Thank you for supplying that to us, as she's smiling brilliantly at me. What I did is I took this a step further, because there was a situation where, and we've had this situation before, where neighbors will argue over property lines and say, oh, the property line isn't there, it's over here, it's over there, this pin's in the wrong place. So what I did in this particular case as an experiment is I took the neighbor's property, inputted the Schedule A, not the entire deed, disclosing their name to AI, so the AI robots don't get us. And I had the two surveys or the two deed Schedule A's compared, and it actually found there was a discrepancy of a few feet between the two, which wasn't a huge deal, but it definitely wasn't a massive discrepancy. We're talking inches here on one end or the other. We're not talking acreage, but it was interesting that it could compare the two Schedule A's, and it even put a drew a diagram of the two parcels and pointed out the discrepancy.
I think that is a great use. If anything, it brings it to the party's attention, a great opportunity to educate the buyer so they feel service. They know what they're getting. Or if you're listing and there's any issues. So we use GeoLink here, our provincial database software, to look up properties. And they say right within our ortho maps, and we use usually the ortho ones because we can see the items on the land then as satellite image of it, if there is going to be any discrepancies. And if there is, and you're questioning whether the garage is on the adjacent property or encroaching, it at least gives you a little bit of a better tool that you can overlap on top of and be able to maybe get to the bottom of those possible issues before they become issues and they cost your seller or your buyer additional fees, legal fees. If the real estate professionals do it on the onset, that's part of the service that the public, the consumers, should expect to receive. And it's a good job that you were doing your due diligence, Michael.
Thank you, Patty. I'm going to input that into AI before I respond with their thoughts.
Okay.
Let's talk about obnoxious agents telling a home seller they absolutely have to have the showing. If they don't, the end of the world, the sky is going to collapse, the sun's going to diminish to work because that was the buyer and they needed to get through in 4 hours. And since you didn't show them through the house, you've lost that buyer. That's a bunch of crap.
Yeah, they're going to get on the plane and they're leaving now.
Yes, they're leaving. They're on vacation here for 6 months, and 2 hours before the plane left, they have to get through your house because they're the buyer. This has actually happened in the province. And
many times.
Many times. And I said to Patty, if these were serious buyers, they would make an appointment and they would be considerate as to the homeowner's schedule and convenience as well. So if an agent ever tells you you've lost the buyer, there's nothing to prevent that buyer from writing an offer sight unseen if they're that friggin' excited about the house. But to tell a homeowner because you didn't allow a showing that you've lost the buyer is completely idiotic. I actually ran idiotic through AI, and we're going to say in more political, the decision wasn't thought through. The reasoning doesn't hold up. And the third one AI came up with, to put it more political, is that's a poor call, and here's why.
Yes, I don't like the pressure that was put on the sellers when it is an agent, and it may not be the agent. It's in some cases it's probably
the agent.
No, in the story that you're referring to, yes, Michael, I know. However, sometimes the buyer makes it feel like we really wanted to get in. We didn't even realize we've fallen in love with PEI. You know what? If we can get through this house, we're going to go home and list our house and move here. This is the story that goes along. So guess what the buyer's agent feels? Oh my goodness, I might actually be able to make a sale. I haven't had one this year. This will be my third one, or whatever their situation is. So then they put on that same energy and intensity to the listing agent. The listing agent transfers that to the buyer or to the seller and tells the seller, you got to let them through. They're getting on the plane at 6. They got to get through at 3:30. I don't care. You just had a birthday party with, your grandchildren or children. If you don't let these guys through, you just missed out on your buyer. Not fair, not professional, and it's not the truth. I don't even know if I've ever experienced a panic showing before a flight or a departure that ever came to fruition.
It turns into nothing, and they're sightseers most of the time. And if they're not, they're going to get home and their friends and family are just going to talk them out of their craziness to begin with when they tell them they're moving to PEI because they saw one house.
Yeah, they get back to reality and life now. They're back to their routine, and it's just not going to happen. So if you're a seller, please do not have to jump through hoops. If your home is show ready, that's different. But don't make arrangements and inconvenience your life. Most showings require 24 hours notice. So if you're a buyer, Most showings require 24 hours notice. That is respectful and courteous unless it's a vacant home and you can get in sooner. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Michael and Patty Show, otherwise known as MAPS, PEI's podcast that helps guide and navigate you through the buying and selling, and a little bit of Prince Edward Island as well. We appreciate each and every one of you. If you're looking for an extension to this podcast, we do have the Moving to Prince Edward Island spelled completely out from the Michael and Patty podcast, that you'll be able to see snapshots of all our episodes. There's a fun Toolbox Tuesday, which gives a lot of really good tips. And some of the tips in that we give on here that we might just highlight, we give an in-depth toolbox on it. There are checklists that you can even have and print off from it. So lots of great information. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for checking in, everybody. Be sure to subscribe, give the video, if it's on YouTube, a thumbs up, do all that great stuff, feedback, star rating, and have yourself a fantastic day.